Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A straightforward topic? Let's do it. What are some of the most evil political decisions in history? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
Probably the decisions of the Khmer Rouge. They were so pure in their stupidity and villainy of just moving everyone living in cities with no experienced farming and telling them to farm and killing them if they didn't, or they didn't do it well. Genghis Khan utterly destroying cities like Merv, the greatest city in the world then, literally a hill of skulls afterwards. The R of Nanking, notable to tie in the propaganda taught to soldiers that they were subhuman. They used to call them logs. They once had contests to see how quickly two officers could race to kill 100 Chinese people with samurai swords. The Japanese newspapers followed it like it was a sports game. Unit 731 is the only thing close to the experiments that were done on those in concentration camps, just a much smaller operation. I feel like saying what they did is going to violate a TOS, but they did painful, fatal things for science, and yes, people did take advantage of the results. A lot of evil in whoever started this aggression. When Zia-ul-Haq, the dictator of Pakistan, decided to reintroduce Sharia and convert Pakistan into de facto theocracy, this is when you start seeing an increase in lynchings and people condemned to death for non-crimes like blasphemy. Many of the problems they're having with terrorism and extremism can be traced back to how religious fanaticism is enshrined within the law. The banzai charges and kamikaze attacks ordered by the Empire of Japan could be seen as a form of political murder. Contrary to popular belief, many of the kamikaze pilots who were volunteered were not fearless fanatical zealots for the emperor. Here's a quote from kamikaze pilot Yukio Sakai. "Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots. I'm not going on this mission for the emperor or the empire. I'm going because I was ordered to." Nixon and Kissinger extended the Vietnam War because the Nixon campaign's main tenet was ending the war. And it's kind of hard to run and end the war campaign when the war's already over before voters go to the polls. Kissinger was the only one who has ear to the ground in both sides of the Vietnam War. The North was ready to talk peace if the South stopped the bombings. The South initially agreed, but Kissinger convinced them to back out of the agreement. This added 5 years to the way, if I recall correctly, so they could get the job they wanted. And this is not even the most barbarous war crime Kissinger committed. Look up the bombing maps of Laos and Cambodia if you want to see the most indiscriminate cluster bombing in history.
Kissinger certainly had his hands in a lot of pies around the world. A diplomat, for sure, but his true intentions can be called into question if you read his real track record in actual history. Maybe not as glorified as he should be. Thoughts?
Not political, but Nestle convincing African women that their breast milk was unhealthy, so they had to put their shitty milk products with any little money they had. The Belgian Congo, just everything about that was absolutely abhorrent, cutting natives' hands off if they didn't meet quotas and using them as entertainment. Britain forcing the Chinese to import vast amounts of opium, turning the Chinese population into addicts purely for profit. Also the British promising Palestinians to both the Arabs and the Jews because they needed their help. F the future trouble the world would cause. Operation Paperclip and this bit on Unit 731. While Unit 731 researchers arrested by Soviet forces were tried at the December 1949 Khabrovsk war crimes trial, those captured by the United States were secretly given immunity in exchange for the data gathered during their human experiments. The United States helped cover up the human experimentations and handed stipends to the perpetrators. The Americans co-opted the researchers' bioweapons information and experience for use in their own biological warfare program, much like what had been done with Nazi German researchers in Operation Paperclip. I mean, is anyone really your enemy if you're still doing business with them like this? Not sure if the UN counts as politics, but here goes. After the Haiti earthquake in 2010, the UN World Food Program set up disaster relief for women. They only allowed women through their food queues under the guise that they would take a bunch to feed their families. But they also let single women without families through the lines. Thousands of bachelors were turned away and consequently died from having nothing to eat. TLDR. The UN is responsible for thousands of Haitian men starving to death. It's not the most evil, but the one that troubles me the most is the decision by the UK government to require a guarantor against dependence on state funds before admitting the children of Jews escaping Nazi Germany. It is the sheer banality. Parents are sending their children unaccompanied to somewhere safe because in many cases we had already refused the parents. And all we Brits were concerned about was it shouldn't mean higher taxes. Somehow, it is portrayed as a good thing. What the Jews involved did was good, but the whole story portrays us Brits as bureaucratic, self-interested, a case where we missed the opportunity to be the heroes we could have been, and like to picture ourselves as. I can't help looking at the current performative policies of the UK Tory party over sending refugees to Rwanda and seeing the same banal evil. They pursue these policies instead of ones that might actually help knowingly. Obviously, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but I also have gotten to see my life repeatedly enriched by the descendants of people who did escape the Nazi regime. Today's refugees are tomorrow's citizens. We should treat them accordingly. Ronald Reagan's people secretly meeting with the Iranians in 1980 to persuade them to hold the hostages until after the election, so that Ronnie could use them as a campaign issue, and B, get big hero points when they were finally released. Leaving aside the idea that going behind the official government's back to undermine foreign affairs is essentially treason, not to mention the extra unnecessary suffering the hostages themselves were subjected to, this set America on its current decline into disintegration of its middle class and third world domination, a process which seems to accelerate every year. The murder of Argentina State Prosecutor Alberto Nisman in 2015 by foreign spy agencies, 3 days before he was to denounce the Iranian president as the mastermind behind the terrorist attack on the Jewish community, and with over 90 deaths in 1994. Iran, France, and Germany were about to sign a nuclear peace treaty, and the deal would not go through if the Iranian president was wanted by the Interpol and put the peace process in the Middle East in jeopardy. They staged a murder-suicide. Argentina received a partial debt pardon as a favor from the Club of Paris, and the German Ministry of Culture financed the Netflix documentary Alberto Nisman with a misleading narrative. In 1944, partisans in Nazi-occupied Warsaw planned a general uprising and timed it to coincide with the advance of the Red Army. But the Soviets paused their offensive, so the Nazis would have time to eliminate the Polish fighters. Stalin had his own plans for Poland, and didn't need a bunch of pesky, battle-hardened Polish nationalists hanging around. Why not let Germans do the dirty work on their way out? I'm not historian enough to compare this to many others, but the overturning of Roe v. Wade has been awful. Women are literally dying, and doctors are unwilling to perform medical procedures for fear of being criminally prosecuted. What? Doctors are leaving states where forced birth laws are taking over, and it's leaving women without normal care during pregnancy. Conservatives turned a normal health care practice that is literally required to save the life of a woman in some cases into a political decision instead of the carefully thought-out decision between doctor and patient. It's not saving babies, it's killing women and destroying their freedom of choice over their own bodies. The Armenian, Pontic, and Assyrian Holocausts. Some apocryphal quote was, "Who remembers Armenia?" by a Nazi. We can also add the Eustace to this too. The Nazis said, "Whoa, chill." The Catholic Church helped perpetrators escape. State Plan 1425. It was the East German program to cheat sports by doping with steroids and getting away with it for the glory of the SED and the state. Some athletes knew and were sworn to secrecy, threatened about the steroid use. Anabolic steroids were given to people without their consent or knowledge. The youngest victim is presumed to be the then 11-year-old Brigitte Bose, who was told that they were vitamins and not to tell her parents. The steroids ruined Brigitte's life. Siege of Jerusalem by the Roman Empire. 1.1 million inhabitants of the city were killed, 97,000 sent into slavery. The bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, also mostly civilians killed. The transatlantic slave trade by numerous countries like the Dutch, English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, not exactly one political decision, but many. You could argue it was more economical related, but the governments and their agents certainly decided and allowed it and participated in it. Slavery influenced the economy heavily, and thus politics, since politics was mostly for the wealthy in those times. Oh, how times have changed. The Trail of Tears and Indian Removal Act, with the help of Andrew Jackson, relocation and forced march of all Native Americans in southern areas to western territories, ethnic cleansing of Native American tribes in the USA. It's no accident that Adolf Hitler used America's policies to extirpate its Indian population as a model for his own extermination of the Jews. He equated his quest for Lebensraum in the East with America's ethnic cleansing of its Indians in the West. In addressing the Jewish problem, the Führer was inspired by America's use of forced resettlement, starvation, deprivation, and detention in expunging its own indigenous peoples. The Volga must be our Mississippi, he declared. And George Wallace died back in '98, and he's in hell now. Not because he's a racist. His track record as a judge and his late-life quest for redemption make a good argument for his being, at worst, no worse than most white men of his generation, north or south. But because of his blind ambition and his hunger for votes, he turned a blind eye to the suffering of Black America, and he became a pawn in the fight against the civil rights cause. Tons of GOP states refuse Medicaid money, which is there for the taking. Utah voters had to hold a referendum to force the evil Mormon dickers to give the poorest people basic health care. It passed by 20 points, marking it, and no legislature promptly repealed the new law. To be clear, this is like a guy walking up to a dying person on the street and offering to pay for a doctor, and someone coming and saying, "No, I won't allow it." And of course, in the case of Utah, a state full of devout Christians standing by and clapping. England choosing to let the Irish starve during the Great Famine that led to over 1 million deaths. It should be taught about in the same way as the Holodomor in terms of being once one of the worst man-made famines in history, which was entirely preventable, if not for a cruel and callous political class. Andrew Jackson ordering the slaughter and the famine of Native Americans just so people could settle on the land left by the Indians and do agriculture there, based on the slavery of black people. Stalin's ethnic epuration in then Soviet Ukraine by organizing famine and exporting all food out of the region. Operation Nacht und Nebel, Night and Fog, in Nazi Germany, ordering the industrial slaughter of around 12 million people in extermination camps. USSR scored even more deaths in their gulags, but an accurate counting is almost impossible there. There's no records, or they simply vanished. Mao Zedong in China approached 100 million casualties during its so-called Cultural Revolution program after World War II. And more recently in Rwanda in the 90s, the Hutu community rose up and killed with knives and machetes more people from the Tutsi community in one single night than both American nuclear bombs on Japan in 1945.